I ended up going on, I have to count. ODP was 102, 109, 111, 118, 137, 139, 148, 158, 168, 174B, 190, 196. So 12 ODP. Then in IODP, on the Geodesic resolution, there's 301, 327, 336, 341S, and 385T. And then I was also co-chief sinus of 380 on the Chiki. So I think that adds up to 22 expeditions altogether. I was a graduate student at Scripps doing geothermal measurements, and I connected with Dick von Herzen of Woods Hole to borrow some of his equipment. He had actually been co-chief sinus on DSTP Leg 3, which is the famous leg that basically verified plate tectonics in the South Atlantic. And he was going to be co-chief sinus of Leg 70 in fall of 1979, which was going to go to the Galapagos hydrothermal mounds. I had done some geothermal field work there using his equipment in 1978, I think it was. And about 3 months before the leg, the person who had been scheduled to be the geothermal scientist pulled out. I never learned out why, but so I got a last second call, would I substitute for him? So I said, yes, I'll come. And I went on my first leg 70 again, fall of 1979. I was physical property sinus and doing heat flow measurements. So I was still a graduate student, and I got invited about a year and a half later onto Leg 78B. When I was almost done with my PhD, that went back to the famous hole 395A to do some logging program. And then I finished my PhD a few months later, became half-time research geophysicist at Scripps and half-time staff scientist at the Deep Sea Drilling Project. I started my PhD in geothermal measurements on the seafloor, and so I started my PhD in 1976. Hydrothermal vents were discovered in 1977 and 78. So it was a perfect time to get in on the ground floor of geophysical studies of hydrothermal processes. So that was my main interest in the early days of the early phase of my involvement in scientific ocean drilling, is using downhole measurements to try and understand hydrothermal processes. And I lucked into a very big opportunity which had been pioneered by a Canadian scientist named Roy Heinemann in some of the earlier crustal drilling legs in the Atlantic. They noticed that when they logged holes that were drilled through the sediments into the uppermost basement, they were getting very cool temperatures. And they deduced that ocean bottom water must be being drawn down the whole cased section through the sediment and into the uppermost basement. So they immediately deduced that the permeability of the basement beneath the sediments must be much greater than the permeability of the sediments. And when we first went to hole 504B on Leg 70 and then again 83, we were careful to make geothermal measurements down in the hole before starting any drilling, because the drilling process disturbs the thermal state in the borehole. And that provided enough data to actually quantify the rate at which ocean bottom water was flowing down the hole. And if we could deduce into what zones in the formation, we could actually estimate the permeability of the formation. So that was my early interest in using scientific ocean drilling to understand hydrothermal processes. These holes were in young crust on the flanks of the ridges, not right at the ridge crest where the black smoke events occur. And so in those days, we started demonstrating that lower temperature hydrothermal circulation in the off-axis settings was equally important as the black smoke or hydrothermal circulation at the ridge crest in terms of heat transfer and actually geochemical alteration of the crust. This led us to the realization that we were drilling those holes into these active hydrothermal systems, and ocean bottom water was flowing down the holes into the systems. So that was, at the very least, a significant perturbation, if not a total disturbance to the system we're trying to study. So that led us in the very late 80s to come up with this idea of sealing the hole and suspending instruments in the sealed hole with day loggers accessible on the seafloor. And that became what we know now as the CORK, Hydrogeological Observatory. This idea we first started discussing it in 1987 at a USAC workshop on wireline reentry of scientific ocean drilling holes. That was convened by Fred Spiess and Mark Langseth at Scripps. And that's where I first started working in earnest with Earl Davis. So we started talking about this idea and got a lot of encouragement. 2 years later at a combined lithosphere panel meeting, downhole measurements panel meeting, Earl and I, and a third person named Bob Carson, who came from the subduction zone drilling community, went off and had a dinner and sketched it out literally on a dinner napkin. And Earl kept that napkin and went home and made a nice actual formal drawing of it. And so we proposed it to NSF, and this sketch was basically the centerpiece of the proposal. And NSF immediately liked the idea and funded it. So that we thought, at the time, it was like a 3-year project. We'll see what happens, and it became a career, basically, using the boreholes for downhole long-term observatories. And sort of at the same time, seismologists started becoming interested in doing the same thing. So they had a sort of a parallel pathway in terms of adapting downhole long-term instruments, seismometers down in the boreholes for long-term seismological observatories. The very first ones were installed in Middle Valley, which is a sedimented spreading center. It's part of the Juan de Fuca system. So they were installed into a very high temperature hydrothermal system, 260 to 300 degrees centigrade. There were two aspects to the instruments. There's pressure monitoring, which was done by having a pressure gauge on the seafloor, and one just below the seal at the top of the hole. And then there was a thermistor cable that was run down into the hole. It's almost impossible to make a thermistor cable to withstand 300 degrees C. So that did not, without spending $1 million. So those did not actually survive very well. But the pressure monitoring was very successful. We had, over the years, the geochemists and then the microbiologists started joining us, suspending instruments down in the hole, or having instruments installed at the wellhead with tubing running down into the hole. And it's all been a very successful collaboration.